ideas about liturgy and God, theology, in just an hour. So I'm just gonna, get our toes slightly damp and hopefully give you some greater connection and meaning to Un'Taneh Tokef, even while just glancing at God and liturgy and life and death. So I'm going to share with you a little history and a little theology and some framing and context and even some thoughts on translation. So we're going to get going. So the first thing I want to share with you, in the words of Rabbi Dr. Lawrence Hoffman, you might recognize his name. He's a contemporary scholar of liturgy. And this is what he says about Un'Taneh Tokef. And I quote, he says that Un'Taneh Tokef is profound, perplexing, it has persuasive power, it's prominent and controversial. Profound, perplexing, it has persuasive power, it's prominent and controversial. I feel the weight of all that every time I read it, every time I listen to it. I feel all those things, and I'm guessing you feel all of them or some of them, or you wouldn't be joining us today. So let's go way back. Let's go way, way back. We call our high holiday prayer book a machzor. And this is from the Hebrew root chazar, to return. So we are returning, this idea of returning. You probably know the weekday prayer book is called, the weekday in Shabbat, is called a sidur, from the word seder. There's an order to it. So we have a returning and an order. But originally this idea, this machzor, and I'm talking, millennia, this machzor was a collection of poetry, piyut, the Hebrew word, piyutim, this collection of poetry. That's what a machzor was. And it was written by, shall we say, liturgical geniuses, at least these men, mostly that I know of, men always, this idea of creating a poem prayer. And a lot of these were written between the 5th and the 7th centuries. That's a really long time ago. At first, it was thought that Un'Taneh Tokef was perhaps written in the 11th century, but the more I've read, the more I've seen, they're now convinced, scholars are now convinced that it was written sometime between the 5th and 7th centuries. That's a really long time ago. And so these poems, these piyutim, written in the land of Israel, they were written for and perhaps used only once a year, right? So they would write this beautiful poem and it was used only once a year. And as time went on, these collections kept growing because new poetry was created. And this new poetry, some of it was accepted. And then, of course, once it was created and accepted, then it had to be shared. And so before the printing press and before the common prayer book was set as we know it today, each person had to carry his own collection, of these handwritten folio-sized pages. So I imagine kind of like a New Yorker cartoon of someone saying, honey, I'm going to shul. And like they had this massive pile of these folio pages, of these liturgical poems. It was poetry. It was, how do we reach out to the divine in this, how do we express ourselves in that way? So eventually, because this collection became so big and the printing press came to be, and we had set prayer books, that the Ashkenazi Jews separated the two things between the machzor, which was used for the Yamim Noraim, the days of awe, the high holy days, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and then the Sidur, right? The Seder, the order of these prayers that we would use every day, and Shabbat, and the Shalosh Regalim, right? The three big series of holy days, Sukkot, Passover in Shul, and Shavuot. And then the third one was also separated, which was the Haggadah for the home use. So we have Machzor, Sidur, and the Haggadah, the telling, which is the home service. So that probably made it a lot easier for people than to carry these massive amounts of poetry around with them. So it begs the question, what's a prayer? You know, we fill our hearts. So what's prayer? And obviously people have written dissertations on this, but I'm going to condense prayer into this idea that if nothing else, a prayer, something from the heart, reaching out to the divine, has a sense of human finitude, right? Human limitations. And it reminds us that we are frail. It reminds us that we have moral responsibilities, right? If this is a calling out to God, a divine presence, what's our relationship? What does God remind us of? It reminds us that we have limitations, that we have moral responsibilities, that we have limitations even in our best intentions. And so what does Jewish prayer remind us? It reminds us that we are accountable for our actions, our behaviors. We're accountable for remembering. We're accountable for gratitude. And we're accountable for our shortcomings and mistakes. We're accountable. And none of this is louder during the year than at Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We are accountable. So the solemnity of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur invokes in us a need to imagine, right? Because that's what a poem is. We're imagining what isn't and trying to put it into words. So we use the human imagination to its limits. And how else are we going to address things like life and death, or sin and punishment, or our moral nakedness standing in front of a divine judge? So it's the human imagination that creates, expands, challenges, and inspires. And that brings us back to Un'Taneh Tokef. It's a poem. It's a poem. It was written by a human who was trying to express life and death and fear and some kind of understanding of the world. And for those of us who don't regularly spend time in Jewish prayer or thought or theology, this is really hard to step into this poem. The strain of this poet's imagination is difficult for the modern mind and modern sensibilities, and at best is just off-putting. But again, it's so powerful in its poetry, in its rhythm, that we keep going back to it. No matter how much we change the service, we go back to Un'Taneh Tokef. So I ask you, is prayer meant just a comfort? Or is prayer meant to disturb us? Is it meant to be a cognitive challenge? Is it meant to be an emotional trauma? All these things. So let's take a look right now at the traditional Un'Taneh Tokef language, which we saw this morning briefly with Rabbi Carrie and Beth. And I'm going to do something that scares me. I know that theology scares a lot of people. I love theology, but what scares me is screen sharing. So hang on, I'm going to do that. Okay. This is the original text with the Hebrew of Un'Taneh Tokef. I'm just going to highlight a few things to remind you. I'm going to guess most of you are familiar with this. So going back to the solemnity and the power of the day, the poet begins right in there. We lend power to the holiness of this day, for it is tremendous and awe-filled. Right? Traditionally, we call Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur Yamim Noraim, the days of awe. Right? Awe is a combination of wonder and fear. Here we are, truly awesome. So we're going to stand. What does it mean to be in wonder and fear? I'm going to go down to the next bolded part. An interesting part of Un'Taneh Tokef. You can follow with me in the bold. As a shepherd herds his flock, directing his sheep to pass under his staff, so do you shall pass, count, and record the souls of all living, and decree a limit to each person's days, and inscribe their final judgment. So it's the poet's imagination taking us to this idea that God is like a shepherd, that each person is in a line passing before a God, passing before this divine presence. And this God is assessing in a moment, you shall live and you shall die. You shall live and you shall die. This is a poet talking. Our modern sensibilities are like, what? What? Let's continue. Here's the most familiar part. We just heard Beth beautifully chant this. On Rosh Hashanah, it is inscribed, and on Yom Kippur, it is sealed. We have 10 days. How many shall pass away and how many shall be born? Who shall live and who shall die? Who in good time and who by an untimely death? Who by water and who by fire? Who by sword and who by wild beast? Who by famine, who by thirst? Who by earthquake and who by plague? Who by strangulation and who by lapidation? That's a fancy word for stoning. Who shall have rest and who wanders? Who shall be at peace and who pursued? Who shall be serene and who tormented? Who shall become impoverished and who wealthy? Who shall be debased and who exalted? So all these, this is poetic. It's even beautiful in the translation. Every translation is an interpretation. It's beautiful. But repentance, prayer, and righteousness avert the severity of the decree. Utshuva, tefillah, tzedakah, umavirin et ro'ah hagzeira. Oh, gosh. Goes on. Let's go to the final line. But you are king who lives eternal. Wow. The poet does a good job. Do we have power? Do we know the future? Who knows the future? This is theology. Does God know the future? I just want to set up a few things. When we as moderns read the prayer book, as we read the newspaper, as we read a book on our night table, our modern minds go to this idea. Is this fiction or nonfiction? Is this true? Is this false? Do good people actually live longer and bad people die earlier? This isn't true. This is false. And then we think that's false. I don't want any part of this. I want to give you a different lens. This is the lens I learned from wrestling with Psalms, because I kept thinking, this isn't the world that I live in, and this is the lens. Description and prescription. Is this describing the world as it is, or is this prescribing the world as we wish it could be. As we wish it could be. When I was younger and I had brown hair, I turned to my favorite guide and Rabbi Rim Meyerowitz, my uncle. And I was struggling with this idea of God. And my uncle Rim shared with me that God is the idea of goodness that we don't see in the world, that it's justice, right? It goes back to imagination. We pray for what we imagine could possibly be. Maybe God and hope are the same thing. My teacher, Rabbi Art Green, says that God is a verb, right? It's what we're doing, imagining, wanting, wishing, praying for. So in a minute, I want to share with you what I wrote in response to Un'Taneh Tokef. I want to share that my sense of God is different from the poet of Un'Taneh Tokef, but I affirm the message. I affirm that we do need to take into our hands this idea of life and death, that this is an urgent thing we need to deal with. And I want to affirm that we need to make meaning and purpose in our lives. And I want to affirm that we need to imagine what this feels like. So now I'm going to go into the scary part, which is share screen again. Okay. So please follow along with me as I'm going to read my version, my response to the poet of Un'Taneh Tokef, and then we can open it up to questions and compare and contrast. I also want to know that after that, we're going to talk a little bit about translation and interpretation. So here we are. We just read the poem Un'Taneh Tokef in translation. And now I'm going to respond to you. Un'Taneh Tokef, facing death, embracing life. On Rosh Hashanah, it is written, and on Yom Kippur, it is sealed. Who shall live and who shall die? On these awesome days, our liturgy posits that God sits in judgment of our behavior, assesses our actions, and determines whether we warrant another year of life. This assertion of divine knowledge calls attention to the frightening depths of our own not knowing. None of us knows whether we will die this year or next year or in many years. Perhaps there is a quiet moment amidst all the words we say on these days when we allow ourselves to come more fully into this awareness. We imagine that the judgment of our lives will be sealed at the end of Yom Kippur. And in facing death, we face the limits of our lives. We are beckoned to become our own judge. There is time, and now is the time. We are not here to accrue bonus points in some kind of cosmic ledger. We are not here to try to escape death by gaining favor with an unforgiving God. We are here to listen to the question that calls out softly, insistently from within and beyond us. What do you want to do with the time you have left? What do you want to do with the time you have left? And teshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah avert the severity of the decree. The harshest decree is not dying without breath. The harshest decree is not living with breath. Teshuva, we turn inward hear our own hearts with courage and resolve to do better. Tefillah, we call out, offering our gratitude, our vulnerability, our desire for discernment. Tzedakah, we extend a hand, share what we have, give sustenance, and dignify with hope. With each of these three gestures, we are offered a gift, the gift of breath that connects us to everything that is, was, and will be. This, only this, can avert the severity of the decree. To live in relationship, to find our own breath in syncopation with another. So I'm open to any questions or comments. I want to tell you that I'm not following the chat. I encourage you to use the chat, but I can't simultaneously follow it and be with you in front of me. So I apologize for not multitasking in that way. But if you want to unmute yourself or raise your hand in some way, Don, can you help me? If someone has a question, please ask.
Yeah, folks should be able to unmute themselves, and if I see anything in the chat, I'll call it out.
Thank you so much. That's so helpful. Thank you. I'm not afraid of silence, so maybe we need a minute to think.
Ellen?
I want to just bring up what was in the chat, which was very meaningful to me as well. Looking at our time, and someone said, being so aware in this current world of how many ways there are to die, and that we see it almost every day. And just bringing that to our awareness of, you know, how much we don't know. You're living in the question that you were saying before. So that's a really good discussion point, I think.
Ellen, thank you. Thank you for monitoring the chat for me. You know,
I learned.
Thank you. So, you know, I think maybe when I was younger, or we didn't have such a quick news cycle, we used to read Un'Taneh Tokef and think, that's so many things, how could that be? But there are fires and floods right now in this country. There's a plague. All these things are right in front of us all the time. So the poet in the 5th to 7th century didn't have the 24-hour news cycle, right? We see all that all the time. And I think all the more so, it reminds us, what do I want to do with the time I have left? And it can have an air of desperation about it, but it can also have an air of intention about it. Like, how am I going to be intentional about my time?
Mm-hmm.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I don't have the 3 calls in front of me, but the first one, I think, Teshuvah, was about reflection, internal work.
Yes.
And then your last line.
Tefillah. So it's tshuva, tefillah, which is prayer, and tzedakah.
And then your final line was about let us be in breath in syncopation with another. So I'm thinking about, well, for me, the pandemic has been a very internal time, and I've gotten to like it a lot. And sometimes it worries me. I mean, I know Judaism has a great emphasis on community, and I certainly haven't withdrawn completely, but I guess I'm just wondering, your last line seems to forget the first of the three. I mean, I don't know, is there a breathing that's going on with another in the first one? Do you understand?
I do understand. I do understand. So first of all, I want to address your comment about enjoying the solitude of the pandemic. I think that we are learning to return to the simple joy of being with our own self. Listening to what our heart says, what our heart needs. I think humans had more space and time for ourselves in the past. And so I too have found so much healing in the space to be in myself and learning to enjoy that. So I'm going to, the poet, the Un'Taneh Tokef poet, gives us in his final refrain, if you look at the top of the screen share, tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah avert the severity of the decree. And Leslie, you come right to my point of my response in the poem, is I see those three things as relationships. And for me, the sense of the divine is in relationship. Mm-hmm. So tshuva, yes, it's our relationship with ourselves. What is a healthy relationship with ourselves? We turn inward. We hear our hearts with courage, which you've just shared that you must be doing. And we think about what we're doing. So tefillah, prayer, is our relationship with God or the divine or this greater sense of whatever is out there. But that gives us, instead of, we can't only turn inward. Let's say you're here today, you have those relationships. So this is our relationship to God, or even just a sense of gratitude in the world, but also recognizing what we can do and what we can't do, right? Our vulnerability, our human finitude. And their last relationship, tzedakah, right? Tzedakah is righteousness in the world. It's what are we going to do, right? To share whatever we have to support those who don't have. We extend a hand. I don't know, are we going to give money? Are we going to give furniture to the Afghan families who are moving here? Whatever we have, we're going to give them, food. And then I believe the most important thing about tzedakah, right? Righteousness, is we dignify other people. We offer dignity. One of the things we've learned the most in the last few years was humiliation. And what humiliation does to people, right? So tshuva, a relationship with ourselves. Tefillah, our relationship with the divine. And tzedakah, our relationship to community. Others who either fortify us or who need to be fortified by us. It's all interconnected. So for me, living in relationship helps me live a meaningful life, helps me determine what I want to do with the time I have left, and helps avert the severity of my time here is limited. I hope that helps you.
Thank you. Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Well, I have a, go ahead, Bonnie.
I just wanted to add, first of all, I think your poem beautifully expresses what I think is the meaning of Un'Taneh Tokef. And I think even in the original, the tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah, will basically modify the harshness of the decree, says to me that we all know we're going to die at some point, but why live with the constant thought that we're going to die, but rather, as you beautifully put it, bring ourselves to the point of being our best selves, to ourselves, to our awesome feeling about the universe and to everybody else. So the severity of the decree is we're not going to live forever, but not to prolong the thinking of that and instead be good people.
Bonnie, thank you. Thank you. I want to add an addendum to that I learned from my Uncle Rim recently. If we do live with the idea of death, when that moment comes, if we have lived life with those relationships, we can have a sense of joy in our living, right? That's where our joy comes from. That's where our satisfaction comes from. And I don't use the word love in my poem because that changes everything. But if we include love in those three relationships, some of us want to have a sense of love and awe for all three of those relationships. But Bonnie, thank you so much. I appreciate your really understanding what I tried to do. So thank you for that. Thank you.
So yeah, Bonnie, that was wonderful.
Hi, Audrey.
Hi, Suzanne. So my mind, as it always does, is going in about 100 different directions. And I love everything you say, except that my personal worldview is a little bit different. Well,
I hope so.
My personal worldviews, I should say, because I don't just have one. So I don't think that death is a severe decree. I think that there is an eternality to us. And for me, I'm very comfortable that the soul goes on even after we die. So maybe that's why I'm not so terrified of it, right? I mean, you know, this body, it can go, but my soul will be there, and I'm okay with that. So that's some of why I struggle a little bit. I love what you've said, and I love that, you know, the teshuva, the three things.
Tefillah tzedakah.
Yeah, that. But I'm going to go back to sort of the beginning of what you talked about, which is about human frailty standing before a divine judge. I think of God a lot of the time, not always, but a lot of the time, as the God within. And I feel like I need to shift that judge part to something else, and I haven't gotten there yet. But sort of like a coach, maybe, or a mentor, right? Who's helping me along the way. You know, I hold that shard of light, one little shard, and everybody in the community writ large holds a shard of that light. And that sort of, for me, takes away the need for judgment.
So Audrey, I just want to commend you on what you've done, a lot of work on this, and you have used your own lens coming from your own personal experience and what your relationship is with the divine, light, coach, or whatever. So we are on the same page, Audrey. We all have to create our own relationship with the divine. That's why it's a relationship. I can't have a relationship with your sense of the divine, and you can't have a relationship with my sense of the divine.
Right.
But you're exactly right. This is what I'm talking about. It's the meaning that we get from doing the work.
Yep.
You were spot on, right? Spot on. Anyone else?
Can I make
Please. I know there's someone there.
Can you hear
No.
me?
I'm not getting you fully.
Is this any better?
This is better. I don't know who's talking.
Okay, good. And Owens, I'm sorry, I'm having problems with my connection, so I turned off my video to try and.
Okay. I'm not hearing anything. Is anyone hearing anything or is it me?
Wondering if maybe that person could type in the chat.
Either that or you can talk to me after class because I'm happy to continue the conversation. This is just the beginning. I'm so sorry because I love to answer the questions in the moment, but I don't think we're going to be able to literally connect.
Can you hear me now? The connection reestablished?
Okay, give it a try
No.
one more time.
Okay, so I'm sorry about this. I just wanted to say that I actually find this a very comforting passage, a very comforting prayer, because it talks about the reality of life. And when you've been through very difficult times in your life, there's a real comfort in having someone say, this is the way life is. This is not some kind of unique retribution or unique thing that happens to you. And the fact that there's actually an amelioration that comes from living a righteous life is a way of saying there are things that you can do to make your life happier, that you have some power within the situation of these vast difficulties. You have the power of finding comfort, joy, celebration, gratitude, even when you're going through these really rough patches. And for me, that's just a very comforting thing as opposed to a horrible thing.
Oh, I wish I could see you. Yes, so beautiful. Yes, 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 exclamation point, right? There's so much that's out of our control. And when the things out of control that bring us, we're heartsick and it's painful. It's nice to know that there's a little bit we do have control over. Right? We do have control over. Our tradition teaches us that we wake up, and you use the word yourself. If we wake up in the morning with gratitude, gratitude shifts our whole lens. And even in what you're describing as a very hard, what the world has given you sounds hard and painful. You have made choices in your life. So your lens brings you comfort. So I really appreciate that. And I'm so glad that this Un'Taneh Tokef can bring you comfort, that somehow there is some kind of structure that we can connect with that will avert the decree of existential or physical suffering. So thank you. Yes, yes, and yes. Another comment. One more right now.
This is Amy. I mentioned to Audrey this morning that I was struggling with the sheep metaphor because I think an important tenet of Judaism is that we have free will. And so, that seems like the opposite of sheep just kind of going past a shepherd who's saying, yep, this one over this way, this one over that way. Even though I think the idea that, of course, there are things that are not in our control, where we are more like sheep, is the reality of our lives. But I do struggle with that imagery. It seems not quite somehow in keeping with who I believe we are as Jews.
So yay for the struggle. Yay for the struggle. So this poet was trying to express maybe it was not descriptive, but prescriptive of how he wanted to feel cared for. I mean, post the Holocaust, right? Some of us think of this shepherd and his flock differently. The line of Jews, who lives, who dies, just so, at least God was looking with some kind of assessment to behaviors I mean, you think of these things in the Shoah. So this is a poem. This is a poem. That's not, and I have to say, that's exactly the part that I respond to in my poem, because that's not my sense of the divine in the world. But I'm not, we're not sure. We don't get to interview the poet. He doesn't have a podcast. We don't know what he was thinking that made him imagine God in this way. But I'm guessing for some people it was comforting. We don't know. And sometimes I'm learning the best answer is, I don't know. I don't know.
I want to just, I'm sorry for the noise in the background of one of my grandchildren. I'm thinking of what it's like to be a sheep and have a shepherd in the 23rd Psalm who comforts me. And I wrote to one of the ministers today. There's been a death here at Brooksby of one of my oldest Jewish friends. I'm doing the funeral tomorrow. His name is Manny Kay. And the minister from Brooksby wrote to me and said, "May you rest in the heart of God." And I went, wow. So what's it like to be a sheep? What's it like to be warm and woolly and eat and not worry about whether you've made your mark on the universe and trust in all the other sheep? Just asking. I don't know much about the outside. I don't go outside much. And Rabbi Offit knows a lot more about chickens and bees and stuff. But maybe one day we'll learn the Torah of being a sheep, not in the sheeps to the slaughter in the Holocaust, but the sheep of the 23rd Psalm who lay down in green pastures.
So thank you for that, because again, it returns to our imagination, how important imagination is in liturgy, in creating prayers, in theology, in our ideas of God. Our imagination is so important. And I'm gonna let that go because I think I would actually like being a sheep. I think that sounds good. I like salad and I like wool sweaters. So maybe Rim, I would be actually a really good sheep. I don't know. But I wanna remind ourselves again, step away from my poem. I want to remind ourselves what Larry Hoffman said, that the Un'Taneh Tokef is profound, perplexing, it has persuasive power, it's prominent and controversial, right? It's so much, and looking around the room, you're going to know the next thing I'm going to say. Leonard Cohen, everybody, Leonard Cohen. Right? Leonard Cohen, this brilliant poet, singer, songwriter, was so moved by Who by Fire that he wrote an amazing piece. Don, are you there to help me? We're just going to play a clip of Leonard Cohen's Who by Fire.
All right, give me just a moment here.
Thank you. This is such powerful text. Leonard Cohen wrote a song about it. The most interesting line to me is his refrain. Who shall I say is calling? Right, it contrasts the mesmerizing part, right? If you look at that video, he doesn't blink, which is a little unsettling. But who by fire, who by water, and then who shall we say is calling? It's a different who. And it goes to that formal way you might respond when we used to answer other people's phones. Who shall I say is calling? Is he talking about God? I've done some research on it. I can't find anything definitive. I'll have to dig more. But when you have a chance, I would encourage you to YouTube that. It's haunting. It's just haunting. And I bring it forward because here's a poet, and this part of his Jewish roots, he used his Jewish roots in other music, but this is just so powerful and demands our attention. If anyone wants to respond quickly, if you have a past relationship with this, with Leonard Cohen, Sue by Fire, if you want to share that, I'd love to hear. I just couldn't do a teaching on Un'Taneh Tokef and not bring up a piece of that remarkable song.
Chris Logan has raised his hand.
Hi, I've heard that many times, and it's always moved me deeply. And what occurs to me listening to it today is he's an intermediary, because he's hearing the one who is calling and trying and preparing to then introduce that one to the listener. So he's hearing a voice that has the answers, or is the answers, perhaps, and he's trying to figure out where that voice is coming from.
Wow. Wow. I love that. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Whoa. Anyone else? Okay. I want to quickly talk about translation. So traditionally, prayer books who had to translate, for example, into English, there's the Hebrew and Aramaic into English for many people who don't speak Hebrew and Aramaic. And for a long time, it was dense, as literal as possible, and that didn't seem accessible. So then we moved to more beautiful translations, and then ultimately interpretive translations, which I'm going to share now. A very popular interpretive translation. Let's see if I can get there. You may have seen this. I'm going to read a little bit of it. In the interest of time, I just want to read a little bit. Written by a man named Stanley Rabinowitz, and it was adapted. And you've probably seen this. It's in most non-Orthodox prayer books now, because it really speaks to the modern mind. And after I read it, I want you to think about what's the shift that was made in this interpretive translation. Why is it more appealing, perhaps, to some people than the sharpness of the other? When we really begin a new year, it is decided. And when we actually repent, it is determined, right? So that's right from on Rosh Hashanah, it is written, and on Yom Kippur, it is sealed, right? Who shall be truly alive, and who shall merely exist? Who shall be happy, and who shall be miserable, right? That goes to, Audrey, your perception, right? Who shall attain fulfillment in their day, and who shall not attain fulfillment in their day? Who shall be tormented by the fire of ambition, and who shall be overcome by the waters of failure? Who shall be pierced by the sharp sword of envy, and who shall be torn by the wild beast of resentment? Who shall hunger for companionship, and who shall thirst for approval? Who shall be shattered by the earthquake of social change, and who shall be plagued by the pressures of conformity? Who shall be strangled by insecurity, and who shall be stoned into submission? I'm going to skip to the end. But repentance, prayer, and good deeds have the power to change the character of our lives, right? Have the power to change the character of our lives. Let us resolve to repent, to pray, and do good deeds, so that we may begin a truly new year. What are the authors doing here? What's shifted? What's the big shift going on? Anyone?
The decider is no longer God, but rather ourselves.
Thank you, Bonnie. Is that as comforting? What does it do?
It gives us agency. Oh, sorry, Bonnie.
No, that's okay. Agency is a good word. Yeah.
Agency is a great word. Yes. It definitely shifts the responsibility. It goes, who said free will? Yes, it goes, yeah, Audrey, it goes to our sense of free will. It goes to agency. It goes to how are we going to make the changes? It goes to perception. It avoids death. That's my biggest concern. I've always loved that interpretive translation. It doesn't put death before us. And I think that is the radical beauty of the traditional Un'Taneh Tokef. Who shall live and who shall die, right? That's it. What do you want to do with the time you have left? Humans like urgency. We need to know a crisis is impending or we're not going to do it. Climate change, it's happening. Maybe now people will do something about it, right? Humans need urgency to act. And there's beauty and lessons in the interpretive translation. From 1800 years ago, I feel more urgency. I feel more urgency, like I better get my act together. I better get my act together. One more comment before I close. Anyone feel the need to, anyone who hasn't spoken yet, feel the need to just put whatever forth for all of us? Okay, I'm going to, I gave all of my shares, including one piece that I didn't have a chance to share. Amy, I'm answering your question right now. Don, is it possible for you to share all of my screen shares with everybody? I don't know how that works. I can send them to Beth and Rabbi Carrie, and they can share it. All I'm just saying is I'm happy to share everything with you. You'll get it. You can get my poem. You can get the link to.
I think I can share a link to it on Google Drive.
Okay.
That's probably the quickest and easiest
Okay.
way
And
to
it looks
do
like,
it.
and Rabbi Carrie also has an idea. Community email. Thanks, Rabbi Carrie. That'd be amazing.
On either our Thursday or our Sunday next mailings, we can put a link in there as well.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you.
So, yeah, so if people want to hang out for 20 seconds,
Okay.
I will post
right.
it in the.
Okay, I'm going to just do my little closing, and then maybe you'll be ready by then.
I will.
So, so we've talked about urgency. We've talked about a lens of fiction, nonfiction versus descriptive and prescriptive, using our imagination to think about the world that we want to create and hope for and pray for. We've talked about who's responsible, God or us, our ideas of God, talked about our relationship with ourselves, our relationship with community, our relationship with the divine. But I think the last thing I want to say, well, there's always more to say, is that I want to look at Un'Taneh Tokef, and I invite you to look at Un'Taneh Tokef with me, with an admission and a commitment. I want to admit that there's a legitimacy that people find this often troublesome. But I also want to commit ourselves that we engage with passages like this as a work of art. You know, the way we listen to Leonard Cohen is the way I want us to read Un'Taneh Tokef. It's a work of art from a troubled soul who's trying to get something out there in a really beautiful way. During the days of awe, right, the Yamim Noraim, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, these are days of both wonder and dread, awe. These prayer poems don't give us the luxury of distance between our life and death that other art forms give us, right? What Un'Taneh Tokef does is takes us into the drama, that we're not only part of the play, but we're cast members in the drama, that we are the actors. And that's huge to take on, but that's our responsibility, that's our burden, that's our discomfort. But Un'Taneh Tokef, with the burden and responsibility, it gives us an opportunity that we might not accept the other days of the year. And that is to feel, to truly feel the intensity of life and the opportunity to learn and grow. It gives us many gifts. So how else do we stand before the divine presence with our fullest selves, if not in awe and wonder? So I want to conclude by wishing all of you and all those you love safety and health. And I wish for you moments of ease and moments of joy and moments of sweetness. And I also wish for you an expansive imagination, and that you continue to find meaning and purpose in your lives. Shana Tova and Amen.